What if you discovered that for over 1,000 years, religious authorities have hidden a book? This book completely changes our understanding of good, evil, and the origin of humanity. What if I told you that an ancient text exists, so powerful and so revealing, that someone deliberately removed it from the Bible you know today? Imagine for a moment that you grew up learning one story. This narrative was carefully constructed around angels, demons, the Great Flood, and the purpose of human existence. Now imagine discovering entire chapters of that story were never told to you. They were not lost. They did not simply cease to exist. Someone decided you should not read them. This is not the start of another conspiracy theory. This is the true history of one of humanity's most ancient and controversial texts, the Book of Enoch. This manuscript survived in the most remote corners of Africa. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved it when the rest of the Christian world condemned it to oblivion. Early Christians considered it sacred. The Church Fathers quoted it with reverence. Then, mysteriously, it vanished from the official canon. Why? What did this book contain? What made it so threatening to the power structures that have controlled the religious narrative for centuries? What secrets does it hold about fallen angels? What about forbidden knowledge? What about the true origin of evil in the world? Over the next few minutes, we will embark on a journey. It will challenge everything you thought you knew about biblical texts. I will not ask you to abandon your faith. I will not attack your beliefs. What I will do is far simpler, yet far more profound. I will show you what ancient sources actually say. I will present the historical evidence that scholars have uncovered. Then I will let you decide what to do with that information. Here is the uncomfortable truth many prefer to ignore. The official version of religious history taught in school, in church, or by your family is not the only version available. Ancient manuscripts exist. Apocryphal texts exist. Historical documents tell a different story. It is a more complex, more mysterious story, and perhaps closer to what truly happened thousands of years ago. The Book of Enoch is not a recent discovery by some adventurous archaeologist. It is not a modern invention by skeptics or critics of religion. This text has existed for over 2,000 years. Second Temple Jews considered it sacred scripture. The New Testament itself quotes and references it. Jude, the brother of Jesus, explicitly mentions it in his epistle as if it were the word of God. Yet this book vanished. It was erased. It was removed. They declared it heretical. Its reading was forbidden under penalty of excommunication. Copies were burned. Manuscripts were destroyed. For over 1,000 years, the Western Christian world lived as if that text had never existed. But what happened in Ethiopia? Why did this book survive there, in the highlands of Africa, when it was annihilated everywhere else? What protected this manuscript from the censorship that swept away so many other ancient texts? What does this tell us about the true history of early Christianity? You are about to discover the Bible in your home, the book millions consider complete and unaltered. It is actually the result of centuries of political decisions, ecclesiastical councils, and power struggles. You will learn that a time existed in history when the Book of Enoch was as important as Genesis. Its revelations about fallen angels, the Great Flood, and the final judgment were considered divine truth by entire communities of believers. Then, you will discover why that text became so dangerous. It had to be removed from official history. This video is not here to destroy your faith. It is here to enrich it. It will show you that the search for truth and spiritual devotion are not enemies. They are allies. Knowing the real history of your sacred texts does not make them less sacred. It makes them more profound, more human. It connects them more deeply with humanity's millennia-old quest to understand the divine. Are you ready to discover what the Vatican does not want you to know? Are you prepared to read the words censored for over 1,000 years? Do you have the courage to face the possibility that everything you were taught about angels, demons, and the origin of evil is only a fraction of the complete story? Then join me. What you are about to discover will not only change your understanding of religious history, it will change your understanding of who you are, where you come from, and the role you play in a cosmic narrative. This narrative is far older and stranger than you ever imagined. Welcome to the mystery of the Book of Enoch. It is the text that survived against all odds. It is the manuscript that defies power. It is the truth they could not erase completely. To understand why the Book of Enoch is so extraordinary, we need to travel back in time. Not to the era of Moses or Abraham, but to a crucial period of religious history. This era forever changed Judaism and prepared the way for Christianity, the Second Temple period. We are talking about the 3rd century BCE through the 1st century CE. Jerusalem was under foreign rule, first by the Greeks, then by the Romans. Judaism was evolving from a religion centered on temple sacrifices and rituals. It was becoming something far more complex and diverse. This was a time of intense theological debate, multiple Jewish sects, and an explosion of religious literature. In this turbulent context, an extraordinary text emerged. It was attributed to Enoch, the 7th patriarch from Adam. Do you remember Enoch? The Bible dedicates only 2 verses to him in Genesis, but those 2 verses are fascinating. Enoch walked with God, and he was no more, for God took him away. He did not die. He was taken alive into heaven. This brief mention created centuries of speculation and mystery. The authors of the Book of Enoch took this mysterious figure and built an epic narrative upon him. The text we know today as the Book of Enoch is not truly a single book. It is a collection of 5 distinct sections. These were written at different historical moments, but are all attributed to Enoch. These sections include the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dream Visions, and the Epistle of Enoch. What did these texts say? They held extraordinary revelations. According to these manuscripts, Enoch was taken to heaven. There he was shown the secrets of the universe. He traveled through the 7 heavens. He saw the throne of God. He conversed with archangels. He received knowledge about humanity's hidden past and its apocalyptic future. The most revolutionary aspect of the Book of Enoch, however, was its narrative about the fallen angels. The canonical Bible only briefly mentions the sons of God who mingled with the daughters of men in Genesis 6. The Book of Enoch, however, dedicates entire chapters to this event. It names the rebellious angels. It describes in detail how they descended upon Mount Hermon. They made a pact among themselves. They took human wives. They taught humanity forbidden knowledge. This included metallurgy, cosmetology, pharmacology, astronomy, and most dangerously of all, magic and sorcery. This was not a marginal story. Academic research has shown that the Book of Enoch was widely read and respected in Second Temple Judaism. The Dead Sea Scrolls. The texts discovered in the Qumran caves contained multiple copies of the Book of Enoch, more copies than of many books eventually included in the biblical canon. The Qumran community, likely the Essenes, considered this text sacred scripture. And it wasn't just them. The New Testament itself shows familiarity with the Book of Enoch. The Epistle of Jude, brother of Jesus, directly quotes from this book. Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about these people. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone. This is a direct quote from the Book of Enoch 1:9. The early church fathers also valued it. Tertullian, Origen, Clement of Alexandria all cited the Book of Enoch as inspired scripture. Athanasius of Alexandria included it in his lists of sacred books. During the first centuries of Christianity, this text was considered part of divine revelation. So, what changed? How did such a revered book become forbidden? The answer lies in the process of canonization. This was the historical moment when religious authorities decided which books would be included in the official Bible and which would be rejected. This process was neither instantaneous nor simple. It took centuries. It was marked by intense debates, ecclesiastical councils, and political struggles within the Church. In the 4th century, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, ecclesiastical power structures began to consolidate. They needed doctrinal uniformity. They needed a clear, closed biblical canon. They needed to eliminate texts that might create confusion or support heresies. The Book of Enoch, with its elaborate descriptions of fallen angels, its complex cosmology, and its detailed apocalyptic revelations, began to seem problematic. Some church leaders argued that it was too fantastic, too speculative, potentially heretical. Gradually, it was marginalized. It was removed from canonical lists. It was declared apocryphal. By the 5th century, the Book of Enoch had almost completely disappeared from Western Christianity. Manuscripts were destroyed or hidden. Its reading was discouraged. Eventually, it was forgotten entirely. Only in Ethiopia, where the Orthodox Church followed its own path independent of Rome, did the book survive as part of the official canon to this day. This contrast is revealing. While the Vatican erased the Book of Enoch from history, Ethiopian Christians preserved it with reverence. They copied it by hand generation after generation. They read it in their liturgies. They considered it as sacred as any other book in the Bible. Thanks to them, when European explorers arrived in Ethiopia in the 18th century, they rediscovered a text their own tradition had tried to completely erase. If this journey through one of history's most censored texts challenges what you thought you knew about the Bible's formation, imagine everything still waiting to be discovered. This channel exists to explore the true history of sacred texts beyond official narratives. Join this community of faith and knowledge explorers by hitting the subscribe button. We don't promise easy answers. We offer an honest journey toward the truth about Christianity's origins. Now let's continue unearthing the secrets the Book of Enoch holds. Now we reach the heart of the mystery. What exactly does the Book of Enoch contain that proved so problematic for religious authorities? What truths were written on those pages that merited its elimination from the biblical canon? The answer is not simple. It begins with a fundamental question that has tormented humanity since the beginning. Where does evil come from? The version most of us know is relatively simple. Lucifer rebelled against God. He was expelled from heaven along with a third of the angels. Since then, he has tempted humanity. Eve ate the forbidden fruit. Cain killed Abel. Human wickedness grew until God sent the flood to cleanse the earth. But the Book of Enoch tells a much more elaborate and, in many ways, more disturbing story. According to this text, evil did not begin with simple human disobedience. It began when 200 angels, called the Watchers, rebelled against divine order in a very specific way. They descended to earth and took human wives. These angels did not just violate the separation between the celestial and the terrestrial. According to the Book of Enoch, they taught humanity knowledge that should never have been revealed. The leader of these fallen angels, Azazel, taught men to forge weapons of war, swords and shields. He taught women the art of cosmetics and jewelry, which the text presents as vanity and seduction. Another fallen angel named Shemihaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots, that is, pharmacology and sorcery. Others taught astronomy, the interpretation of celestial signs, and what the text calls the secrets of iniquity. The implication is clear. Much of human knowledge and technology did not come from natural evolution or cultural development. It came from an illicit transfer of angelic knowledge. The consequences of this transgression were catastrophic. The children of these unions between angels and humans were the Nephilim. These giants possessed enormous power and insatiable appetites. They devoured all of Earth's resources and eventually began to devour humanity itself. The earth filled with violence, corruption, and blood. Creation itself was being destroyed. In this context, the Book of Enoch presents the flood not as punishment for simple human disobedience, but as a cosmic necessity. It was the only way to cleanse the earth of the genetic and spiritual corruption caused by the fallen angels. The Nephilim had to be eliminated. The contamination had to be purified. Why was this narrative considered so problematic? There are several reasons. First, it implies that angels possess free will. They can sin in very specific and carnal ways. This complicated theological discussions about the nature of angelic beings. Second, it suggests that much human knowledge has a corrupt origin. What should be done with science, technology, and art if it all stems from an angelic rebellion? Third, and perhaps most significantly, the Book of Enoch presents a highly elaborate cosmology. It includes multiple levels of heaven, prisons for fallen angels, and a detailed system of apocalyptic judgment. This complexity could be seen as a distraction from simpler, more controllable doctrines. Scholars have noted that the Book of Enoch also presented problems because it positioned a human figure, Enoch, as a recipient of direct revelations from God and as a witness to cosmic events. This could be interpreted as competing with Mosaic revelation or with apostolic teachings. Furthermore, the text contained specific and detailed apocalyptic prophecies. These covered the final judgment, the resurrection of the dead, and the eternal punishment of fallen angels. These prophecies were so vivid and specific, they could lead to varied interpretations, apocalyptic movements, or messianic expectations difficult for ecclesiastical authorities to control. But here is the fascinating part. Despite all these supposed problems, the content of the Book of Enoch is not radically different from other texts that did remain in the Bible. The Book of Ezekiel contains equally fantastic visions. The book of Revelation, John's, is just as, if not more, elaborate in its apocalyptic symbolism. The book of Job mentions the sons of God without explaining their identity. The real difference might not be theological. It could be political. The book of Enoch survived in communities that maintained independence from Rome. It disappeared in areas where centralized ecclesiastical control was stronger. This suggests the book's censorship had as much to do with power consolidation as with doctrinal correction. Historical sources reveal resistance to the text's removal, even within the early church. Some Christian groups continued reading it in secret. Certain monastic communities preserved fragments. The Ethiopian tradition proved it was possible to maintain this book as sacred scripture. It did not result in heresy or doctrinal chaos. So, what was truly at stake? Perhaps the most honest question is this: who decides which texts are sacred and which are not? What is lost when those decisions stem more from political considerations than from a genuine search for spiritual truth? To truly grasp the magnitude of what the Book of Enoch represents, we must analyze three central concepts. This text uniquely develops them: the Watchers, forbidden knowledge, and cosmic justice. First, the Watchers. This term appears in Daniel and other apocalyptic texts. Nowhere is it as elaborate as in the Book of Enoch. These are not simply evil angels. According to the text, they were a specific class of celestial beings. They were assigned to oversee God's creation. Their very name indicates their function: to observe, to protect, to maintain order. The tragedy of their fall, according to Enoch, was driven by something paradoxically human: desire. They saw the beauty of human women and desired them. This narrative raises profound questions about the nature of sin. Can a celestial being sin in the same way a human does? What does this say about the universality of temptation? The text suggests the Watchers did not just sin individually. They conspired collectively. They made a pact on Mount Hermon, swearing they would all descend together. None would suffer the consequences alone. This collective dimension of sin, this idea of organized rebellion, adds a layer of complexity. We do not find it in other biblical narratives about the fall of angels. Second, forbidden knowledge. This is perhaps the most philosophically rich concept in the Book of Enoch. The idea is not simply that some knowledge is inherently evil. Rather, certain knowledge becomes dangerous when acquired prematurely. It is dangerous when gained without the spiritual maturity required to handle it. The fallen angels taught metallurgy, enabling the creation of weapons of war. They taught astronomy, which became linked with astrology and divination. They taught pharmacology, which mixed with sorcery. The pattern is clear. Neutral or potentially good knowledge becomes corrupted. It is corrupted by the context and intention of its use. This narrative poses a question that remains relevant today. Should humanity seek all possible knowledge, or are there limits to be respected? What happens when we access technologies or knowledge for which we are not morally prepared? The Book of Enoch suggests the flood was, in part, a consequence of this epistemological transgression. Third, cosmic justice. The Book of Enoch presents an elaborate vision of the final judgment. This vision profoundly influenced both late Judaism and early Christianity. It describes Sheol, the place of the dead, divided into compartments. There, souls await the final judgment. It describes the eternal punishment of the fallen angels, chained in fiery abysses. But most significantly, the text reconciles the existence of evil with God's justice. If God is good and powerful, then why does evil exist? The Book of Enoch offers an answer. Evil is real and powerful because beings of great power and knowledge introduced it, but it is temporary. A day is appointed for judgment, when all injustice will be corrected. This theodicy, this justification of God's goodness in the face of evil's existence, was enormously influential. The Book of Enoch's ideas about final judgment, the resurrection of the dead, and the punishment of the wicked appear in the Gospels. They appear in Paul's epistles and in the Revelation of John. So, here lies the historical irony. Many fundamental Christian beliefs about angels, demons, final judgment, and the afterlife were influenced by a book later removed from the canon. The ideas remained. The text that originated them was censored. It is like erasing the foundation of a building and pretending the structure stands on its own. Academic studies have shown early Christianity was far more diverse and complex than official narratives suggest. There were multiple texts, multiple traditions, multiple interpretations. The Book of Enoch was part of that rich tapestry. Its removal was not a pure theological process. It was political and cultural. Understanding these concepts is not just an academic exercise. It means recovering parts of our spiritual history that were deliberately forgotten. It means recognizing that the search for truth has always been more complicated and nuanced than simplified narratives lead us to believe. Now let me ask you a question I want you to share in the comments. Do you believe humanity should not seek certain knowledge? Or do you think all knowledge is neutral, depending solely on its use? This question, posed by the Book of Enoch over 2 millennia ago, remains deeply relevant today. I want your perspective. Write it in the comments right now. Let's create a real dialogue about these ideas. I will continue. To truly understand the roots of the Book of Enoch, we must travel even further back in time. We must look to the oral and written traditions that existed in the ancient Near East millennia before this text was compiled. The Book of Enoch did not emerge in a cultural vacuum. It was written in a context where multiple religious and mythological traditions coexisted and interacted. The text's authors were Jews living in a Hellenistic world. They were exposed to Greek, Persian, and Babylonian ideas. These influences are reflected in the text in fascinating ways. Let's start with the figure of Enoch himself. In Genesis, Enoch receives brief mention in the genealogy from Adam to Noah. It states he walked with God and was taken because God took him. This cryptic description suggests Enoch had a special relationship with the divine. It suggests he did not experience normal death. This characteristic made him the perfect candidate to attribute celestial revelations to. If he was taken to heaven alive, he could have seen things no other mortal saw. This logic is not unique to Judaism. Many ancient cultures had similar figures, heroes or sages elevated to the heavens who obtained divine knowledge. But something deeper exists here. Research suggests some traditions about Enoch might have roots in very ancient Mesopotamian myths. Figures in Sumerian king lists resemble Enoch. These were antediluvian sages who received knowledge from the gods and were taken to heaven. The connection with the myths of the Apkallu is particularly interesting. They were the 7 sages of Sumerian tradition. They taught humanity the arts of civilization before the flood. According to these myths, these sages were semi-divine beings who descended the heavens. Does this sound familiar? The narrative of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch holds striking parallels with these ancient traditions. But here is the crucial difference. While Mesopotamian traditions depicted these beings as benefactors of humanity, the Book of Enoch portrays them as transgressors. The knowledge they brought was not a divine gift. It was a violation of cosmic order. This moral inversion is significant. It shows how Second Temple Judaism reinterpreted broader cultural traditions through its unique theological lens. The flood narrative also has ancient roots. These roots extend far beyond the biblical account. The Epic of Gilgamesh, Atrahasis, and other Mesopotamian epics contain stories of a great deluge. The god sent it to destroy humanity. In many of these versions, the flood resulted from humanity growing too noisy or numerous. This bothered the gods. The Book of Enoch takes these elements, but it transforms them. The deluge is not a divine whim. It is necessary justice. Humanity did not annoy God. The corruption caused by the Watchers had reached an unsustainable point. This ethical reinterpretation of ancient myths characterizes Jewish religious thought of that era. We also need to consider the context of the Babylonian exile. Jews were taken captive to Babylon in the 6th century BCE. There they encountered vastly different religious traditions. They saw the ziggurats. They heard stories of gods descending from the sky. They learned about elaborate cosmologies with multiple levels of heaven and earth. These experiences transformed Judaism. Ancestral traditions were no longer enough. They needed texts that could engage these other worldviews. They needed to explain their faith in terms that made sense in this new multicultural context. The Book of Enoch is, in many ways, a product of this dialogue. It would be a mistake to view the text simply as syncretism. It is not an indiscriminate mix of traditions. The authors of the Book of Enoch did something far more sophisticated. They took elements from multiple traditions. They reinterpreted them within a strict monotheistic framework. Babylon's gods became rebellious angels. The myths of the Apkallu transformed into the Watcher's narrative. The deluge became an act of divine justice. This ability to absorb and transform broader cultural traditions is a hallmark of Abrahamic religions in general. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have done this repeatedly throughout their histories. They take elements from existing cultures, then they reinterpret them within their own theological frameworks. The Book of Enoch is an early and fascinating example of this process. It is not a corruption of Jewish faith. It is an expression of how that faith adapted and grew in response to new cultural contexts. Precisely because of this, it became problematic for authorities. It testifies to this evolution. It shows the seams of how religious traditions were constructed. These authorities preferred to present revelation as monolithic and immutable. Understanding these roots does not diminish the text's spiritual value. On the contrary, it enriches it. It shows us that humanity's quest for the divine has always been a dynamic, creative process. It is deeply connected to the cultural and historical context of each era. Now we must trace the extraordinary journey of the Book of Enoch through the centuries. It is a story of veneration, censorship, disappearance, and ultimately, rediscovery. It is also a story that reveals much about how religious institutions and ecclesiastical power truly operate. During Christianity's early centuries, roughly the 1st to 3rd centuries CE, the Book of Enoch enjoyed immense prestige. Justin Martyr, an early Christian apologist, quoted it. Irenaeus of Lyon, the great anti-heretical theologian, mentioned it in his writings against Gnostic heresies. Clement of Alexandria called it prophetic scripture. Tertullian, perhaps the text's most vocal defender, passionately argued for its canonical status. His argument was simple, yet powerful. If Jude, the brother of Jesus, quoted the book in his epistle, then he clearly considered it inspired. If it was good enough for an apostle, who were they to reject it? But by the 4th century, the tides were turning. Jerome, the scholar who translated the Bible into Latin for the Vulgate, expressed doubts about the book. He argued its exclusion from the Hebrew canon was reason enough to reject it. Augustine of Hippo went further. He suggested the book was too ancient and its authorship too uncertain to be trustworthy. These were not purely theological objections. The historical context is crucial to understanding what was happening. Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire in 313 CE. For the first time, the Church wielded real political power. With that power came the need for doctrinal uniformity. The ecumenical councils of the 4th century defined orthodoxy. This included the Council of Nicaea in 325 and the Council of Constantinople in 381. What constituted Arian heresy? What was the exact nature of Christ? How did the Trinity relate? For these discussions, texts like the Book of Enoch were problematic. Their elaborate angelic cosmologies were distractions at best. They were sources of doctrinal confusion at worst. The Bible's canonization process was neither instantaneous nor universal. Different Christian regions held varying canons for centuries, but gradually, a consensus emerged. Powerful ecclesiastical leaders and official councils influenced this. That consensus did not include the Book of Enoch. By the 5th century, the book had almost completely vanished from Western Christianity. There is no evidence it was systematically burned or forbidden under penalty of death, but it was effectively marginalized. It ceased to be copied. It stopped being read in churches. It was no longer taught in theological schools. In an era before printing presses, manuscripts relied on scribes for preservation. Marginalization was equivalent to extinction then, but the story did not end there. As the Book of Enoch vanished in the West, something extraordinary happened in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church adopted Christianity in the 4th century. It developed its own biblical canon, independent of Rome and Constantinople. In that canon, the Book of Enoch held a place of honor. Why was Ethiopia different? There are several reasons. First, geography. Ethiopia was relatively isolated from the Mediterranean's ecclesiastical power centers. Mountains and desert created natural barriers. Ecumenical council decisions took centuries to arrive, if they arrived at all. Second, tradition. The Ethiopian Church claimed direct descent from the Ethiopian eunuch baptized by Philip in the Book of Acts. They saw themselves as preservers of a pure apostolic tradition. It was uncontaminated by Roman or Byzantine politics. If their spiritual ancestors considered the Book of Enoch sacred, who was Rome to tell them otherwise? Third, language. The Book of Enoch survived in Ethiopia in Ge'ez, the ancient Ethiopian liturgical language. Meanwhile, in the West, the original Aramaic text, even though the Hebrew original had been lost, a complete translation existed in Ethiopia. It had been preserved for over 1,000 years. Throughout the Middle Ages, Europe endured the Dark Ages and then the Renaissance. The Protestant Reformation fractured Western Christianity. The Inquisition burned heretics. Yet, in the highlands of Ethiopia, copyist monks continued transcribing the Book of Enoch. They showed the same reverence they gave to the Gospels. Not until the 18th century did European explorers travel to Ethiopia. They began reporting rumors of a strange ancient book. The local church considered it sacred. It was not until 1773 that the Scottish traveler James Bruce managed to bring 3 copies of the manuscript back to Europe. The rediscovery caused a sensation in academic circles. Here was a text the church fathers had quoted. It was believed lost forever. Now it was suddenly available again. The first translations into English and other European languages began to appear in the early 19th century. With each translation, with each study, a clearer picture emerged. This text had been central to Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 confirmed the antiquity and importance of the Book of Enoch. Aramaic fragments of the text were found in the Qumran caves. They proved the Ethiopian copies were not late inventions. Instead, they were faithful translations of manuscripts dating back centuries before Christ. This historical evolution teaches us something profound. It reveals how religious traditions are built and deconstructed. Sacred texts do not fall from the sky fully formed. Human communities preserve, transmit, canonize, or reject them. These decisions are based on specific contexts. These decisions are not irreversible. When a text is censored, marginalized, or removed from official discourse, something fascinating occurs. The ideas it contained do not disappear completely. Instead, they transform. They migrate into other texts. They are preserved in fragments, in allusions, in doctrines. These doctrines no longer recognize their original source. This is exactly what happened with the Book of Enoch. The text was removed from the Western canon, yet its ideas deeply permeated Christian theology. Most believers today do not recognize this. Take, for example, the popular image of Satan and demons. Most Christians today imagine Satan as a fallen angel. He rebelled against God out of pride. He was then cast out of heaven. They imagine legions of demons who followed him in his rebellion. This narrative is so ingrained that people assume it comes directly from the Bible. But here is the uncomfortable reality. The canonical Bible says very little about this. In the Old Testament, Satan appears primarily as the accuser. He is a member of the heavenly council. He tests Job's faith. The identification of the Genesis serpent with Satan is a later interpretation. It is not explicit in the text. The account of Lucifer's fall in Isaiah 14 probably referred originally to the king of Babylon. It was not a fallen angel. Where does this elaborate demonology come from then? Much of it originates from the Book of Enoch. The narrative of angels who rebelled, who taught forbidden knowledge, who corrupted creation, and who are now imprisoned awaiting final judgment. That is in Enoch. It is not in Genesis or Revelation. When the Book of Enoch was removed from the canon, its ideas were not eliminated from theology. Instead, they were absorbed and reinterpreted. The Church Fathers had read Enoch. They incorporated its concepts into their teachings. Medieval theologians built upon these ideas without recognizing their source. Dante, in his Divine Comedy, describes levels of hell. These have more in common with Enoch's cosmology than with the New Testament. The same occurred with ideas about the final judgment and resurrection. The Book of Enoch contains some of ancient Judaism's most elaborate descriptions. They explain what happens after death. It describes Sheol divided into compartments. There, the righteous and the wicked await judgment under different conditions. It describes a physical resurrection of the dead. It describes a judgment where every action will be evaluated. These ideas greatly influenced the New Testament. Jesus speaks of the final judgment in terms reminiscent of the Book of Enoch. Paul describes a resurrection of the dead. The Revelation of John contains apocalyptic visions. They have clear parallels with Enoch's visions. But when the source text was censored, these ideas were attributed completely to New Testament revelation. It was as if they had sprung from nothing. This transformation was not accidental. It was part of a deliberate process. They aimed to construct a coherent theological narrative. It could not depend on problematic texts. Ecclesiastical authorities wanted Christian doctrine to appear to emerge solely from canonical scriptures and apostolic tradition. They did not want it from apocryphal texts. But historical reality is more complicated. Early Christianity was a rich ecosystem of texts, oral traditions, and varied interpretations. The Book of Enoch was a fundamental part of that ecosystem. Its influence is everywhere in the New Testament. This is true even if its name was erased. Academic research has traced these connections. They have shown how Enoch's concepts about the spirits of the giants transformed into doctrines about demons. They showed how Enoch's cosmology of multiple heavens influenced Paul. He spoke of being caught up to the third heaven. They showed how Enoch's elaborate angelology lies behind New Testament references to archangels and principalities. The fascinating thing is that these transformations did not necessarily distort the original ideas. They decontextualize them more. Doctrines about angels and demons in traditional Christianity are recognizable. This is true if you know the Book of Enoch. Without that context, they seem mysterious. They appear to arise from fragmentary biblical references. There were also genuine distortions. When a text is censored but its ideas survive, those ideas can be misinterpreted or exaggerated. The original text is not there to verify them. Some medieval superstitions about demons and possession were likely exaggerations. They stemmed from concepts originally more nuanced in the Book of Enoch. Furthermore, the text's elimination created a vacuum. Other traditions filled it. Without the Book of Enoch as a reference point, Christian demonology absorbed elements. These included Greek philosophy, Persian dualism, and Germanic folklore. The horned, trident-wielding devil we know from medieval iconography owes more to Pan and pagan deities. It owes less to any biblical or Enochian description. This blend of preservation and distortion teaches us something important. It shows how religious traditions truly function. They are not immutable monolithic blocks. They are dynamic processes. Ideas migrate, transform, and combine with new influences. Censoring a text does not kill the ideas it contained. It merely frees them to evolve without the anchor of the original text. The result, in the case of the Book of Enoch, is clear. We have a Christian tradition. Its doctrines on angels, demons, final judgment, and the afterlife are deeply influenced by a book. That book officially does not exist in the canon. It is like a building constructed on invisible foundations, or a melody based on a song no one admits to hearing. Recognizing these transformations, confronting these misconceptions and distortions is not an attack on faith. It is simply historical honesty. It is an acknowledgement that religious traditions possess a history, that they evolve, and that human decisions in specific contexts shape them. Perhaps recovering censored texts like the Book of Enoch helps us better understand the origins of our own beliefs. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd, searching for a lost goat in the caves near the Dead Sea, made one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. What he found would forever alter our understanding of Second Temple Judaism, early Christianity, and the Book of Enoch's place within this narrative. The Dead Sea Scrolls, as these texts became known, contained fragments of almost every Old Testament book, but they also contained something more: multiple copies of the Book of Enoch. In fact, more fragments of Enoch were found at Qumran than of many books eventually included in the biblical canon. This discovery proved revolutionary for several reasons. First, it confirmed that the Book of Enoch was not a late invention or an Ethiopian curiosity. It was an ancient text, revered by Jewish communities centuries before Christ. The Aramaic fragments found at Qumran dated back to the 2nd century BCE, proving the text was older than many scholars had assumed. Second, the fact that the Qumran community, likely the Essenes, preserved multiple copies of the Book of Enoch suggested they considered it sacred scripture. These were not casual readers. They were a dedicated religious community, meticulously copying and studying texts they believed divinely inspired. Third, the manuscripts revealed multiple versions of the Book of Enoch circulating in antiquity. Textual variations, additions, and sections appeared in some manuscripts but not in others. This confirmed what scholars had suspected. The Book of Enoch was not a single text, but a collection of related materials compiled over several centuries. The Qumran evidence also unveiled something fascinating about how these ancient Jewish communities interpreted Genesis. They found other texts, like the Genesis Apocryphon, which expanded the fallen angel narrative similarly to the Book of Enoch. Clearly, this interpretation of Genesis 6 was not marginal. It was central to how many Second Temple Jews understood their own scriptures. But the evidence does not stop with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Linguistic research has traced the Book of Enoch's influence in other ancient texts. The Book of Jubilees, another apocryphal text, contains clear references to Enoch's narrative. The testaments of the 12 patriarchs show similar influence. Even late rabbinic texts, while technically rejecting the Book of Enoch, contained traditions clearly derived from it. In the New Testament, evidence of familiarity with the Book of Enoch abounds. Beyond the direct quote in Jude, conceptual parallels exist in the Gospels. When Jesus speaks of the Son of Man coming in glory to judge the world, he employs language prominent in the Book of Enoch, where the Son of Man represents a celestial messianic figure. The Apostle Peter, in his second epistle, mentions angels who sinned, being cast into Tartarus and kept in chains of darkness until judgment. This description aligns far more closely with the Book of Enoch than with any canonical Old Testament passage. In fact, some scholars argue it is virtually impossible to comprehend this passage without knowledge of Enoch's narrative. Evidence also stems from the patristic tradition. The writings of the Church Fathers from the first 4 centuries are replete with references, quotes, and allusions to the Book of Enoch. Tertullian quotes it extensively. Origen discusses it in his commentaries. Clement of Alexandria treats it as prophetic scripture. These were not marginal writers. They were central figures in the formation of Christian theology. So, what does all this evidence tell us? It tells us that for several centuries, from at least 200 BCE to 400 CE, the Book of Enoch was a central text in the religious communities that eventually gave rise to Christianity. It was not a marginal curiosity. It formed part of the de facto canon for many communities. The evidence also shows that the book's removal from the Western canon was not a pure theological process, but a political one. It was not removed because it was deemed false or heretical. It was removed because consolidating ecclesiastical power structures deemed it problematic. That decision had as much to do with considerations of doctrinal uniformity and institutional control as it did with theological truth. Most revealing is the contrast with Ethiopia. There, the same text was preserved, revered, and held sacred throughout these centuries. It caused no heresy. It did not destroy faith. It created no doctrinal chaos. It simply enriched the religious tradition of a community that never felt the need to censor it. Archaeological, textual, and historical evidence paints a clear picture. The Book of Enoch was a central text in Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity. Its censorship was a contingent historical decision, not a divine verdict on its value or veracity. Now, consider something that shifts the entire perspective. If for centuries, the religious communities closest to Christianity's origins considered the Book of Enoch sacred scripture, if the apostles themselves quoted it with reverence, what authority did the ecclesiastical councils of the 4th and 5th centuries possess to declare it apocryphal? Were they closer to the original truth than the Second Temple communities? Ponder that as we continue. Now we confront the most uncomfortable question of all. Why exactly was the Book of Enoch censored? Not the official answer regarding its dubious authorship or fantastic content, but the real reason, the political, institutional reason. To understand this, we must grasp what was at stake in the 4th century when Christianity transformed from a persecuted religion into the official religion of the Roman Empire. This change was not merely a spiritual victory, it was a complete transformation of power structures. Before Constantine, Christianity was diverse, decentralized, and pluralistic. Multiple Christian communities existed with different practices, different texts, and different interpretations of who Jesus was and what following him meant. Gnostics possessed their own gospels. Ebionites had theirs. Marcionites completely rejected the Old Testament. Many of these communities read and revered texts like the Book of Enoch. But once Christianity became a state religion, this diversity became problematic. An empire demanded uniformity. It required everyone in its territory to believe the same, practice the same way, and recognize the same authorities. Doctrinal diversity represented chaos from the imperial power's perspective. The ecumenical councils of the 4th century were not purely theological exercises. They were political exercises backed by immense state power. Emperor Constantine himself presided over the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. He presided not as a theologian, but as a political leader who demanded religious unity in his empire. Decisions made at these councils were not suggestions. They were imperial decrees with the force of law. In this context, texts like the Book of Enoch presented multiple problems. First, its cosmology. The elaborate system with multiple levels of heaven, complex categories of angels, and detailed narratives about antediluvian events was difficult to control doctrinally. If you allow people to read and believe these texts, how do you control which interpretations are correct? Second, the Book of Enoch presented a narrative for the origin of evil. It differed from the Genesis account. In Genesis, evil begins with the disobedience of Adam and Eve. It is human sin. But in Enoch, evil starts with the rebellion of celestial beings. They corrupt creation itself. This is a significant theological difference. It impacts doctrines of original sin, redemption, and human responsibility. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the Book of Enoch authorized revelations. These revelations existed outside official ecclesiastical control. If Enoch could receive direct revelations from God, what prevented others from claiming the same? The Church was consolidating its authority. It sought to be the sole mediator between God and humanity. Texts suggesting direct access to the divine were dangerous. I am not suggesting a diabolical conspiracy. I do not believe church leaders were Machiavellian villains. They were not consciously suppressing the truth. Many probably genuinely believed they protected the faith. They guarded it from error and confusion, but they also protected their own institutional authority. This happened consciously or unconsciously. Religious institutions have interests. All human institutions do. They seek to preserve power structures. When a text threatens those structures, even indirectly, strong incentives exist to marginalize it. Consider the contrast with Ethiopia again. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church never experienced the same imperial pressure for uniformity. The Roman or Byzantine churches did. It was more geographically isolated. It was more politically independent. It did not need the same level of doctrinal control. It was not serving the needs of an expansive empire. In that context of greater independence and less centralization, the Book of Enoch survived. Not because Ethiopians were wiser or holier. Their political and institutional circumstances were simply different. Historical sources also reveal this. The censorship of apocryphal texts was neither complete nor uniform. Even within the Western Church, resistance existed. Some monasteries continued copying forbidden texts. Some communities read them in secret. Censorship is never total. Some people always value knowledge preservation over obedience to authority. But the reality remains. Without the printing press, without technology for widespread preservation and distribution, official marginalization was almost destruction. If official monastic scriptoria stopped copying a text, if theological schools stopped teaching it, if priests stopped reading it in liturgy, the text eventually disappeared. This pattern is not unique to the Book of Enoch. Many early Christian texts were censored, marginalized, or destroyed. Gnostic Gospels, apocryphal Acts of the Apostles, and alternative apocalypses were among them. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in 1945, contained dozens of texts. These had been completely forgotten. The lesson here is not to distrust all religious authorities. We must recognize this. Decisions about sacred texts are human decisions. They are made in specific historical contexts. They are influenced by considerations beyond the pure pursuit of spiritual truth. The Book of Enoch was not eliminated because it was false. It was eliminated because it was inconvenient for power structures. These structures were consolidating in the 4th and 5th centuries. This is an uncomfortable truth, but we must recognize it. Only then can we honestly understand the history of our religious traditions. Recognizing this is not an attack on faith. It is spiritual maturity. It means recognizing God can work through imperfect human processes. Divine revelation does not require infallible institutions. The pursuit of truth sometimes demands questioning official narratives. We have discussed censorship and politics. Now we return to the fundamentals. What does the Book of Enoch actually say? Not what others say about it, but what the text itself contains. The Book of Enoch, in its complete Ethiopian form today, divides into 5 main sections. Each section has its own voice and purpose. Each was probably composed in different historical periods. The first section, the Book of the Watchers, is perhaps the most known. Here we find the detailed narrative of the fallen angels. The text names 200 angels. They descended to Mount Hermon, led by Shemihaza and Azazel. It describes their pact to descend together. It details their union with human women and the birth of the Nephilim. The detail is fascinating. The text describes these giants. They grew to 3,000 cubits in height. They consumed all of humanity's production. Eventually, they began devouring each other and humanity itself. It describes how Azazel taught weapon manufacturing. Other angels taught sorcery, astrology, and other occult arts. Then came the divine response. Archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel reported to God. They spoke of the corruption on earth. God ordered the watchers chained. They would remain under the earth's hills until Judgment Day. He ordered the Nephilim destroyed by making them fight each other. He then commanded the flood to cleanse the earth. Remarkably, the text presents this not as arbitrary punishment. It portrays it as cosmic necessity. Creation was being destroyed. The natural order was violated. The flood was restoration, not vengeance. The second section, the Book of Parables, extensively develops the concept of the Son of Man. Here, Enoch sees visions of the Son of Man. He sits on the throne of glory. He judges kings and powerful figures. He brings justice to the oppressed. The similarities to language Jesus uses in the Gospels are striking. The text describes the final judgment with visceral detail. Kings of the earth will be stripped from their thrones. The rich who oppress the poor will be tormented. The righteous will be vindicated. A strong current of social justice runs through this section. It resonates with the Old Testament's prophetic themes. The third section, the astronomical book, is completely different. It is essentially a treatise on astronomy and calendars. It describes the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. It presents a 364-day solar calendar. This differed from the lunar calendar used by most Judaism of that era. This section shows the Book of Enoch was not just theology. It was also ancient science. The fourth section, the Book of Dreams, contains two apocalyptic visions. The first vision recapitulates history from Adam to the flood. It uses animal symbolism. The second vision is known as the Vision of the Week of Bulls and Lambs. It recounts Israel's history until the end of time. It is prophecy presented as Enoch's vision. The fifth section, the Epistle of Enoch, is a long letter. It addresses future generations. It contains ethical teachings. It warns of coming judgment. It reflects on God's justice. It emphasizes God sees all actions. Nothing is hidden. Everything will eventually be judged. But beyond the specific content, the text itself speaks volumes. At a deeper level, this text speaks to the very nature of religious revelation within Second Temple Judaism. It reveals a community grappling with profound questions. Why does evil exist? What is the true purpose of suffering? How do the celestial realms connect with the earthly? What ultimate fate awaits at the end of days? This text also reveals a cosmology. The universe is far more complex and populated than the simple book of Genesis suggests. It describes 7 heavens. It details multiple categories of angels. It delineates places for both punishment and reward. A cosmic history unfolds, stretching from before creation itself, extending far beyond the world's end. These sources also inform us about the text's vital function. It was not merely abstract theology. It offered profound comfort to oppressed communities. When you read the Book of Parables, you find its emphasis on the judgment of unjust kings and the vindication of the poor. You hear the voices of people suffering under political oppression, longing for divine justice. It also served as an attempt to make sense of suffering. If evil is so powerful and pervasive, if the wicked seem to prosper while the righteous suffer, then a larger cosmic explanation must exist. The fallen angels provide that explanation. The final judgment offers the necessary hope. Academic documents have demonstrated that the Book of Enoch functioned as what anthropologists term an origin myth. It explained the origins of all that is evil: war, oppression, injustice, and death. It was not history in the modern sense. Instead, it was a sacred narrative that imbued human experience with profound meaning. Perhaps most importantly, this text speaks to the intricate relationship between knowledge and piety. Enoch is presented as one who walked with God. Because of this, he received extraordinary revelations. The text suggests that the pursuit of spiritual knowledge is a noble endeavor. God reveals himself to those who genuinely seek him. This inherent tension between revealed knowledge and institutional authority perhaps made the text so problematic. It suggested that truth could be accessed directly, not solely through official mediators. This notion, more than any specific doctrine, truly threatened existing power structures. We now arrive at what might be the most crucial part of our journey. How do we reconcile everything we have learned? How do we integrate this profound knowledge about the Book of Enoch with our own beliefs and traditions? The first temptation might be to view this as a direct battle. The Book of Enoch versus the official canon. Apocryphal texts versus the Bible itself. Hidden truth versus established doctrine. But this presents a false dichotomy. It does not have to be a war. The history of the Book of Enoch teaches us something far more subtle and profoundly important. Religious traditions are dynamic processes, not finished products. They evolve, they adapt. They include and exclude texts based on shifting contexts. Recognizing this does not weaken faith. It matures it. Consider the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. For 1,500 years, they have maintained the Book of Enoch as part of their canon. This has not resulted in heresy, doctrinal chaos, or any turning away from Christ. For them, the book enriches their understanding of the Scriptures. It does not contradict them. It coexists peacefully with the Gospels, with Paul's epistles, and with all the rest of the canon. This demonstrates that we can value texts like the Book of Enoch without rejecting the broader tradition. You do not need to choose between Enoch and Genesis, between the Apocrypha and the canon. They can coexist as distinct layers within a rich and complex tradition. In fact, many biblical scholars today argue that knowing texts like the Book of Enoch actually enhances our understanding of the canonical scriptures. When we read Jude and see its direct citation from Enoch, understanding the full context of that quote enriches our reading of Jude. When we see Jesus use the language of the Son of Man, recognizing the echoes from the Book of Parables adds profound depth to our understanding of how Jesus viewed himself. This does not undermine the scriptures. It honors them by contextualizing them appropriately within the world of Second Temple Judaism where they first emerged. We also need to reconcile our understanding of ecclesiastical authority. The councils that excluded the Book of Enoch from the canon were not necessarily wrong. However, they were also not infallible. They were human leaders making decisions within specific historical contexts. We respect their decisions while we recognize their inherent limitations. For Catholics, this does not have to mean rejecting the magisterium. It signifies recognizing that the magisterium itself has evolved in its understanding throughout the centuries. The Second Vatican Council in the 1960s recognized the vital importance of historical critical study of the scriptures. This would have been considered heresy in previous centuries. The Church's positions do change. For Protestants, who emphasize sola scriptura, studying the Book of Enoch can deepen their understanding of what the scriptures truly meant to early Christians. It does not undermine sola scriptura. Instead, it contextualizes it historically. For the Eastern Orthodox, whose canon includes more books than the Protestant or Catholic traditions but not the Book of Enoch, this serves as a powerful reminder. Different legitimate traditions have made different choices about which texts to include. For those outside these specific traditions, or for anyone questioning their faith, the Book of Enoch can serve as a vital bridge. It demonstrates that religious traditions have always held more diversity and complexity than simplified narratives suggest. There is ample room for questions, for exploration, and for an honest search. Another necessary reconciliation lies between faith and historical knowledge. Some fear that critical study of sacred text will destroy faith, yet the experience of countless believers proves the opposite. Understanding how the scriptures formed, how traditions evolved, can deepen faith. It makes faith more reflective and less naive. The God emerging from this study is not a God who demands ignorance for worship. He is a God who works through complex historical processes, through imperfect human communities, and through evolving traditions. This God proves more profound and mysterious than those depicted in simplified narratives. We also need to reconcile our understanding of truth itself. Is religious truth something fully deposited in the past, merely waiting to be preserved? Or is it a living entity, progressively discovered across generations? The history of the Book of Enoch suggests the latter. Religious truth is not a static object. It is a dynamic process. Each generation rediscovers it, reinterprets it, and applies it to new contexts. Texts that one generation found dangerous, another generation finds profoundly illuminating. This is not relativism. It is a recognition that God is greater than any single text, any tradition, or any theological system. The search for God remains a continuous journey, not a destination already reached. Finally, we must reconcile our expectations about what religious texts can truly accomplish. The Book of Enoch does not answer all our questions about the origin of evil or the purpose of suffering. It offers a compelling narrative, a unique way to ponder these profound mysteries. It functions much like Genesis, like Job, like any sacred text. Religious texts are not definitive answers. Instead, they are invitations to profound reflection. They represent accumulated wisdom from previous generations who grappled with the same fundamental questions that torment us today. To value them does not mean blind acceptance. It means engaging with them honestly in dialogue. The Book of Enoch, then, is not a threat to faith, but a gift. It offers a window into how our spiritual ancestors thought about the divine. It is one more voice in the millennia-old conversation about God, evil, justice, and human purpose. Listening to that voice does not pull us away from the truth. Instead, it brings us closer to the rich complexity of our traditions. Reconciliation is not easy. It demands holding tensions. It requires abandoning simplistic certainties. It calls for intellectual and spiritual humility. The result, however, is a deeper, more reflective, and more honest faith. Ultimately, that honors God more than protected ignorance. We have reached the end of this extraordinary journey. We began with a simple question: why was the Book of Enoch removed from the Bible? What we discovered, however, was something far deeper and more significant. We discovered that the history of sacred scriptures is not a straight line of perfectly preserved divine revelation. It is a complex human narrative, full of political decisions, power struggles, and shifting cultural contexts. Far from weakening faith, recognizing this can actually strengthen it, because a God who can only work through perfect processes, through infallible institutions, through immutable texts, is a small God. But a God who works through human history in all its complexity and contradiction, that is a truly sovereign and mysterious God. The Book of Enoch teaches us something fundamental about the pursuit of truth. It teaches us that official versions of history never tell the complete story. There are always marginalized texts, silenced voices, and forgotten perspectives. Part of spiritual maturity means having the courage to seek those voices, to listen to those perspectives, and to read those texts. Not to reject tradition. Instead, we do it to enrich it, to understand its true origins, to appreciate its complexity rather than settling for simplified versions. We also learned something about power and how it operates within religious institutions. We learned that censorship is not always about protecting truth. Sometimes it aims to protect authority. Sometimes it aims to maintain control. Recognizing this is not cynicism, it is honesty. The very institutions that censored the Book of Enoch also preserved the Gospels, systematized theology, built hospitals, and educated generations. They are neither entirely evil nor entirely good. They are simply human. We can appreciate their contributions while also acknowledging their flaws. Perhaps most importantly, we learned something about ourselves. We learned that we can handle complexity. We can hold tensions. We can question without destroying. We can explore without losing our anchor. The story of the Book of Enoch is, ultimately, a story about the resilience of truth. They tried to erase it. They destroyed manuscripts. They declared it heretical. They marginalized it for over 1,000 years. Yet, it survived. In the mountains of Ethiopia, protected by a community that valued its wisdom, it waited. It waited until the world was ready to rediscover it. Now, in the 21st century, with the Dead Sea Scrolls confirming its antiquity, with academic studies revealing its influence, and with translations available in dozens of languages, the Book of Enoch has returned. It comes not as a threat to faith, but as a resource to deepen it. What do we do with this? How do we respond to this rediscovery? Some will choose to ignore it, remaining in the comfort of the familiar. That is their choice. But others, the brave, the curious, those who value truth over comfort, will choose to explore. They will read the text for themselves. They will form their own opinions. They will decide what value it holds for their own spiritual journey. In that process, they will join a millennia-old conversation about the divine, evil, justice, and human purpose. This is not an easy journey. It requires abandoning simplistic certainties. It demands facing uncomfortable questions. It calls for admitting that we do not have all the answers, but it is a journey worth taking. In the end, a faith tested by honest questions is far stronger than a faith protected by ignorance. The Book of Enoch invites us to think differently about revelation, authority, and tradition. It invites us to recognize that the boundaries between the sacred and the profane, between the canonical and the apocryphal, between the orthodox and the heretical, are more blurred and contingent than we have been taught. And that is fine. In fact, it is more than fine. It is liberating. It means we are not trapped in fossilized interpretations of the past. We can engage with our traditions, honoring them while questioning them, preserving them while evolving them. So, what is the legacy of the Book of Enoch? It is not just an ancient text about fallen angels and apocalyptic judgment. It is a reminder that the search for truth never ends. There is always more to discover. Official narratives never tell the complete story. It is an invitation to be honest, to be brave, to question without destroying, to explore without losing your anchor, to grow in understanding without losing reverence. If you are watching this, if you have made it this far, it is because you are exactly the kind of person for whom this message is intended. You are someone who does not fear difficult questions. You are someone who values truth over comfort. You are someone willing to look beyond official narratives to uncover the complete story. The journey does not end here. In fact, it has only just begun. We have reached the end of this extraordinary journey about the Book of Enoch, the text the Vatican tried to erase, but which survived in the highlands of Ethiopia. If you have made it this far, it is because you are one of those people who are not afraid to ask difficult questions. You value knowledge as much as faith. You understand that seeking historical truth does not weaken beliefs. Instead, it deepens them. This channel exists for people exactly like you. It is for explorers of religious history who want to go beyond simplified narratives. If you have not subscribed yet, this is the perfect moment. We have so much more to explore together about censored texts, hidden histories, and the true roots of our religious traditions. Activate the notification bell so you do not miss any videos. Now, another video will appear on your screen, continuing to expand your perspective on apocryphal texts and the mysteries of the early Bible. Do not stop here. The search for truth never ends. So many more secrets await discovery. And remember this: questioning is not betraying your faith. It is honoring it with intellectual honesty. It is maturing it. It is deepening it. Difficult questions do not destroy true faith. They refine it.